Madam President.
Republican Leader.
With President Obama officially on the campaign trail now, it's hard not to be reminded of the kind of candidate he was the last time around and to marvel at the difference. At some point, the post-partisan healer who pledged to unite red and blue America became the divider-in-chief, a deeply divisive president who never seems to miss an opportunity to pit one group against another, who is now determined to win re-election not by appealing to America's best instincts, but all too often to their worst. Even the New York Times editorial page wrote this very morning that the country is more divided than it was 4 years ago under this president. Some have argued that the transformation we've witnessed proves that the president was a liberal ideologue all along, that the task of governing revealed his true instincts. And that may be true. But there's an even simpler explanation than that, and one that in some ways is even more disappointing. It's the idea that the president said what he needed to say to get elected then, and that he'll say whatever he needs to say to get reelected now. It encapsulates why the American people are so very skeptical of politicians. The president's policies may have disappointed. A health care bill that was supposed to lower costs is causing them to rise. A stimulus bill that was supposed to create jobs was better at generating punchlines. But one of the greatest disappointments of this presidency is the difference between the kind of leader this president said he was and the kind he turned out to be. How did that happen? Well, I think the president just put too much faith in government. Let's face it. There isn't a problem we face that this president didn't think the government could solve. And despite all the evidence to the contrary, he still can't seem to shake the idea that more government is the answer for what ails us. When the stimulus failed, it wasn't the government's fault. It was the Republicans. When the health care bill caused health care costs to rise, same thing. When trillions are spent and jobs don't come, it's ATM machines, it's the weather, it's bankers, it's the rich, it's Fox News, it's anything other than the government. This is why the sickening waste of taxpayer dollars we've seen so many times over the last 3 years, whether it's at a solar company like Solyndra or at a lavish party that federal bureaucrats threw for themselves in Vegas, it's viewed not as a symptom of a larger problem in Washington, but as a problem to be managed, something to acknowledge, and then move beyond. Because they just don't seem to see it. The president seems to view government the way some parents view their children. It can do no wrong. So if there's a problem to solve, a challenge to tackle, the solution is always the same: more government, more government. And the results are always the same: a disappointment to be blamed on somebody, anybody else. I think the president summed it up pretty well during a speech he gave in New York just yesterday. This is what he said: "The only way we can accelerate job creation that takes place on a scale that is needed," he said, "is bold action from Congress." Really? The only way to accelerate job creation is through Congress, not the private sector? Hasn't the experience of the last 3.5 years taught this president anything at all about the limitations of government action? 3.5 years and $5 trillion later, there are nearly 500,000 fewer jobs in the country than the day the president took office. That's not what most people would describe as a good return on investment. Yet that's all we get: the same government-driven solutions he's been pushing for 3.5 years. Nearly 13 million Americans who are actively looking for a job can't find one. Millions more have given up looking for a job altogether. as worker participation rate is the lowest it's been in 30 years. And more than half of all college graduates, the best prepared to enter the workforce, can't find a good job. Half of college graduates can't find a job. And this president is proposing the same old ideas that have failed before. Some government action failed? Then just do it again on a larger scale. That's the approach this president has taken. It's his approach still. It's the clearest sign he's literally out of ideas. But he's unwilling to try something different. He's unwilling to confront the fact that a government that might have worked well a half a century ago is outdated and in desperate need of reform. So he's resorting to the same old political gimmicks and games that he criticizes others for using. Earlier this year, the president mocked those who, every time gas prices go up, dust off their three-point plans to lower them, especially in an election year. That was the president. Yet yesterday, there he was in an election year up in New York proposing a 5-point plan of his own to revive the economy, a to-do list, in effect, a to-do list for Congress. The cynicism here is literally breathtaking. Here's a president who in the morning worked hand in hand with Senate Democrats to ensure that legislation to freeze interest rates on student loans wouldn't pass. In the afternoon, giving a recycled speech in which he pleaded for an end to the very gridlock he was orchestrating. There's perhaps no better illustration of how far this president has come from the heady days of his last campaign. Look, Americans voted this president into office on a promise of bipartisan action. Orchestrating political show votes on student loans and giving Congress a Post-it note checklist of legislative items to pass before the election really isn't what the American people expected. They expected us to work together, and they still do. The president knows as well as I do that the solution to our economic problems lies not in the Post-it note congressional agenda dictated from a lectern in New York, but through a sound, limited government pro-growth plan, which includes comprehensive tax reform, a true all-of-the-above energy policy, and the elimination of burdensome regulations that are hurting business and hindering job creation. Now, Republicans have been calling for these policies for years, and the president at one time or another has claimed to support them. These are proposals where Republicans and Democrats can find common ground. In other words, a plan designed not to control free enterprise from Washington, but to liberate it. We just need the president to show some courage and some leadership. We'll get this economy going not by handing out more special favors and credits to favored industries and groups, but by simplifying the code, clearing out the loopholes, and lowering rates for everyone. In less than 8 months, Americans will be hit with the biggest tax increase in history unless we act. The president knows as well as I do how devastating this would be for the American people, literally for everyone. People who are already struggling will have to do with even less. Businesses that are already struggling just to keep afloat will see Washington getting an even bigger take than it already is. The looming tax hike will be absolutely devastating. And yet here we are, less than 8 months away from it, and the president is busy orchestrating failure here in the Senate and waving around some 5-point plan cooked up by some high-paid political consultant out in Chicago. Now, I'm not in the business of giving the president campaign advice, but I am in the business of trying to get the best possible outcome for the American people. And here's an issue, tax reform, where I know the two parties have a shot at working together to help this economy and restore the American dream for all those who've started to doubt whether it will even be there in a few years. So I would respectfully ask the president to ignore his campaign consultants for once and do what's right for the nation as a whole. Republicans here in Congress are ready to work with you, Mr. President, on the kind of comprehensive reforms that you yourself have called for in the past. Working together might not help your campaign, but it sure would help the country. So my message to you is this: we're ready whenever you are. I yield the floor.